Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Blueprint OMS Recalls webinar. My name is Layla, and I'm on the training and support team here at Blueprint Solutions. This webinar will give us a quick overview of Blueprint's recall feature. Also, I wanted to note my colleague Jenna is in the chat, so if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to put them there. There'll also be time at the end to ask questions too. So first, we're going to navigate to our Recalls tab. Recalls act as a to-do list for clinic staff to contact patients to follow up about any recommended procedures, treatments, or tests discussed during their last appointment. They may also be used for internal purposes to remind staff to take particular action on a patient's file. In the Recalls tab, we can see there's various columns here on how this information is categorized. We have recall date, next appointment, patient, telephone, recall type, location, assignee, status, and notes. By clicking the top of any of these columns, we can filter by date here, also by next appointment. Also, if you ever wanted to alphabetize this patient list, we can do that as well. We can also see up top, we're able to filter this by recall period. Recall period is the recall due date. We can filter by location, recall type, status, or assignee. We also can search patients by first name or by last name here. Certain recalls are time sensitive and must be performed by a specific deadline. The recall date column turns red if the following conditions are true. If the recall has the required box checked, which we can see here, the recall is due within 7 days or is overdue, and if the patient doesn't have an appointment scheduled within the next 30 days. We can also see for any of these required action recalls, we'll see a red bubble here next to the Recalls tab showing how many recalls are requiring action. To filter just by these recalls, we can either select this red bubble, or in the recall period, we can filter by action required. And here we can see all of those required action recalls. I'm going to next filter back to all here. Now we're going to go over creating any recalls. So all of these recalls can be added straight here at the bottom by selecting Add Recall. First, it's going to populate your patient list. Here you can search by last name. Next, we can add a recall date. The recall date will be the date you want to contact the patient. So if I wanted to contact this patient in 2 weeks, we can select the 16th. Here we can select a recall type. All the recall types and statuses are fully customizable in the setup menu. We'll go over in a moment where to add that. But we'll select callback for this example. Next, we have assignee. You're able to assign any of your recalls to any staff members in your clinic. We'll assign this to my colleague Jessica here, and then we can add a status here and any notes needed here. And we can select create. That recall is now created and added into my list and assigned to my colleague Jessica. Another way to create a recall is straight from the patient's file. So if we are in the patient browser, we can work with my colleague, or we can work with our patient here, Sally. If we have this patient open and in the patient's record on the go while working on their file and needing to follow up for a certain reason, we can create a recall by going to the patient dropdown and selecting Add Recall. We're going to get the same exact pop-up we just saw. We'll select the recall type. We can assign it to somebody and add a status and any notes here. And then we can click Create. The last way to create a recall is straight from the patient's marketing tab. So if I go to this patient's marketing tab, we can see here at the bottom is going to show any of the patient's recalls. It's also going to show a history of them because those recalls will never fully be gone from your system even when you remove and complete them. If I'd like to create a new recall, I can select Add Recall here at the bottom. It's that exact same pop-up as we saw before. We can select the recall type. We can choose an assignee and a status as well and add any notes if needed. We'll click Create here. So that's how you can create any of those custom recalls. We also have a series of automated recalls. To show a table here of all those automated, I'm going to pull open our Blueprint user guide. So certain recalls generate automatically based on data present in the patient file. Automatic recalls can be removed or created upon request. Here you can see a list of US-specific and Canadian-specific automated recalls. For U.S. clinics, we have the 30-day post-fitting. This will be triggered when a hearing aid invoice is billed, and the recall date will be 30 days from the invoice date. We also have hearing aids for 4 years old that will be triggered when the hearing aid invoice is billed, and the recall date will be 4 years from that invoice date. We have hearing aid warranty expiration, which will trigger when the aid's expiring in the next 30 days, and that recall date will be on that warranty expiration date. We have loaned aid due, which will trigger with an aid on the loan status, and that date will be when that loaned aid is due. And then lastly, for the US, we have not seen in the past year, so this will be triggered for patients who have not had an appointment scheduled in over a year, and that will be on the current date. For Canadian clinics, you can see we have the VAC 2-year hearing assessment, which will be triggered when a hearing aid invoice is billed to VAC, and that date will be 2 years from the invoice date. We also have the WSIB Service Block 2 and the WSIB Annual Hearing Aid. Those will be triggered when the hearing aid invoice is billed to WSIB, and we can see one will be on the recall date of 90 days, and one will be 1 year from the invoice date. And like the US clinics, Canadian clinics also have the loaned aid due. I wanted to note here also, if any would like any of these to be turned off, we can also turn off these automated in your system. And also you can see in the third column, or the fourth column, the trigger for removal. Required recalls such as loaned aid due cannot be completed or canceled or postponed. That recall is automatically completed once the loaned aid is sold or returned to stock. To create any of these custom automated recalls, our technicians can do this on the back end for you, and this can be done by submitting a support ticket. A few examples of these custom automated recalls that we've seen clinics add are, for example, we can create one if you'd like to do a follow-up 60 days after a certain appointment type. We can automate a recall after this appointment is completed, and this recall can then be manually removed, or we can automate it to be removed by activity in the system, including a certain item being sold. In Canada, you can use recalls to track eligibility periods. So this can be done by having a recall generated after a hearing aid sold with a certain insurer on file and allocated to that invoice. We can populate that recall a certain amount of years to know when the patient is eligible for the next hearing aids. You can then reach out to the patient. The recall can then be auto-removed with the next hearing aid sale or when a specific benefit code is billed. So if you'd like any of those to be created, any custom ones, feel free to submit a support ticket with any of that information here. We'll now move back into our Recalls tab within Blueprint and go over how to edit recalls. You're able to edit recalls one recall at a time, or you can do it en masse. We'll first cover how to edit one at a time. So if I were to select a recall here, when I right-click, I have the options to assign, complete, cancel, or edit. When I select edit, we get this pop-up here. I'm able to change the assignee if needed, the status. You can add an outcome as well, and any notes here. You can also see we have the option when we right-click on a recall to select Assign. If I assign this to myself here, we can see here on the side, this green bubble here will show any recalls that are assigned to you. So if I were to select this green bubble here, it's going to pull open my Recalls tab. This is going to be my own personal to-do list of recalls that are assigned to me. Assigning recalls is great for if you are, for example, a front desk staff and you want to make a note for a provider to follow up with a patient. You can create a recall, assign it to the provider, and make a note to follow up with the patient regarding whatever is needed. To edit multiple recalls at once, we can either select a recall and hold down Control on our keyboard and select multiple, or we can also drag and drop to select multiple like this. We can right-click, and we have the same options as before. We can select Assign from here if we'd like to assign these all to one user. We also have the option, if we highlight them, to select Edit. Here, if we wanted to change the recall status to all one thing, I can select Open here for this example. If I right-click, I then have the option to Fill All, and you can choose from all of these drop-downs. So if I'd like to fill all statuses, we can see they all move to open. Same if I'd like to do the same for outcome. Let's say we wanted to do other for all of these. If I right click, I can select fill all outcomes and click update. Another option you have is we can book an appointment straight from the recall tab. So if I right click on this this recall here, I have the option to select book appointment. This will just bring you a quick reference to the create event here. You can choose a day and time to schedule this appointment. And then we can click create event, and we can see that will add that recall, that next appointment here. At the bottom of the screen, we have the options for patient details as well. So if you need to navigate to the patient's file, we can select patient details here. This is a way to quick reference to the patient's file. We can also see on the summary screen, it's going to show the patient's most recent recall here, including that date and type. If we go back to the recalls tab, if you highlight multiple recalls and if you wanted a hard copy of your to-do list, one way to do this is to select print entry here at the bottom. This is just one way if you wanted to print it out to have a hard copy of your to-do list with any of those recalls, statuses, and notes here. Another option is we have the reports. We have a recall report. So if we navigate to reports over here on the side, I can search for my recall report. This report here will show patient recalls broken down by location for a specified time period and specified time period here. We can choose either PDF or XLS. I'm just going to choose XLS here. Any reports in Blueprint in XLS will show a little bit more columns of data. So we'll just show an example of here, and we'll do it for the month here. And so we can see here, it'll show a little bit more data on these recalls here. The last thing I wanted to touch on today was how to create any recall types or statuses within your Blueprint. To do this, if you go into the Setup menu, we can select Recalls. Here we have recall statuses and types. You can create new by selecting Create New here at the bottom. You can give it a name, and then you can choose if you'd like it to be required. You can also make one recall a default. This will just save you time from scrolling through your recall list. It will always populate as the first up at the top. I also wanted to note if you ever wanted to deactivate one, you can right-click, select Edit Details, uncheck the active box, and that will deactivate that recall and remove it from your recall list. If you ever needed to reactivate one that was already deactivated, you can see here up top if you uncheck the Show Active Items Only. You can see here is going to show all your deactivated recalls, and if you needed to reactivate one, you can select Edit Details, check the active box, and select Update. So that's how we can add any of those into your system. Does anyone have any additional questions? I see there was a question asking if we can turn off auto recalls. Our technicians can do this on the back end. For example, I've seen people wanting to turn off the not seen in the past year. If you'd like that to be disabled on the back end, you can just submit a support ticket and ask us to turn off that automated recall. There was a question asking if there's a way to modify the screen to make the quick glance notes larger. All of these columns are fully editable, so you can choose how big or small you'd like them to be. So if I would like to make the notes a little bit larger, I can make these smaller, and you can kind of play around with these fields here, however you'd like to make them display a little bit bigger. If there's another question asking if you edit setup, does it affect all locations? And yes, it will. So if you add any recall statuses or types here in the setup menu, that will be added to all locations. There's another question regarding when to use the required recall. So this is just for if you'd like to make something required and it needs action. It will populate red in the list. So if you'd like to have something show up red in the list, like these here, they'll show red if they have that required box checked off here. And then also the recall will need to be within 7 days or overdue. and it will also make sure that the patient doesn't have an appointment scheduled within the next 30 days. There's a question regarding if the font size can be adjusted. Unfortunately, we cannot adjust the font size here in this recall tab. I believe if you increase your display on your computer, it may display a little larger, but within Blueprint, we can increase this font here. There's another question regarding if this is where we'd create an option for a cancellation list. This could be a way if you'd like to create recalls for appointment patients that you'd like to have a patient reschedule. You could also create an automated recall to have when appointment is canceled to have them show in the recall list. Another feature that would be great is that needs action panel here in the scheduling here. There's another question regarding how to remove already booked patients from the recall list without checking the hide booked patients box. So for example, if I had these two here, I can see they've already booked an appointment. And if I wanted to remove these, I can highlight these, right click, select complete or cancel, and I'm going to change the outcome to appointment booked or completed and click OK. They'll now be removed from my recall list. There's mention about a cancellation for when people are booked way out and want to be moved up if something opens up sooner. Currently, there's a development request out for this feature, but you can use your recalls if you'd like to kind of keep track of who's on that list, and you could do the recall date of when they were added if that would be helpful. You could then go into your recall type, filter by everyone, on that cancellation list, and then you could see the dates of when they were added. So there's a question regarding what happens when it's not assigned to anyone. So if I go here in my recalls, you can see there's a number of recalls that are not assigned to anyone. They're just going to sit in your recall list. You can still make action on them and still edit or complete or cancel or assign them. They're just not going to show up on anybody's assigned to you here. So we can see right here on my recalls on my task panel here in green, this is going to show all the recalls that are assigned to me. They're just never going to show assigned to anyone. They're still going to show in your recall list though here. So you can see here a number of recalls that are not assigned to anybody, but they're still showing here in my list. There was a question regarding creating some automated recalls, wondering if a recall can be auto-created when a patient is canceled, and then yes is checked for needs to reschedule, and then can be auto-assigned to a specific person. I believe our technicians can create this on the back end. What I would do is submit a support ticket, and what we can do is create a custom recall based off this activity within the system to be generated into this recall list. But I would just submit a support ticket with that data there, and we can get that created on the back end for you. If there are any additional questions, feel free to submit a support ticket by going to this top help dropdown and selecting create support ticket. There'll be a recording of this webinar out early next week. But if you guys have any other additional questions, feel free to submit these support tickets and if you want any of those custom automated recalls created. But thank you for your time. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.